Snow fell like dust over the silent streets of Chicago. The wind scraped through the empty bus stop where Clara Miller sat, her shoulders trembling beneath a thin coat that used to be beige but had long turned gray from wear. Her hands were wrapped around a small bundle, her baby, Eli, no more than 7 months old. His tiny lips were pale, his eyelids fluttering. She didn't notice right away that he'd stopped moving. Her eyes were glazed, unfocused, fixed on the broken clock above the stop. The bus was 20 minutes late, or maybe she was early. Time had stopped meaning anything. 2 days ago, her landlord had thrown her out. She'd begged him for another week, but he'd only said, "You're already 2 months behind, Clara. I can't." Then he shut the door. Now she sat here, in the biting cold, waiting for a bus that might take her anywhere warmer than this. Her breath came out in white clouds, and the baby's head sagged limply against her chest. A voice broke the silence. "Ma'am, you okay?" Clara startled. Out of the dark corner of the station stepped a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with layers of ragged clothing that looked like they'd been stitched together from different lives. His face was dark, lined with exhaustion, his beard flecked with gray. A wool hat covered his head, but snow still gathered on his shoulders. She clutched Eli tighter. "Don't come closer." The man raised his hand slowly. "I ain't gonna hurt you. Your baby." "What about him?" she snapped. He pointed gently. "He's not moving, ma'am." Her heart froze. She looked down. Eli's lips were blue. His body was limp, his tiny fingers stiff with cold. Panic clawed up her throat. "Oh, my God!" She started shaking him, whispering his name, her voice breaking. "Eli, honey, please, please." The man was beside her before she could stop him. "Here," he said, his tone firm, calm, like someone who'd done this before. He pulled off his thick, filthy coat and wrapped it around the baby. The smell of smoke and street dirt filled the air, but the warmth was immediate. He cupped his hands around the child's face and began breathing slowly, steadily, not too hard, not too fast. Clara could only stare. The man's breath turned into vapor around them, swirling in the cold. His eyes were focused, determined, not the eyes of a drunk or a madman. Something about his movements. They were careful, trained. After a few seconds, the baby twitched. A soft, broken whimper escaped his mouth. Clara gasped. He's breathing." The man let out a shaky sigh and stepped back. "He's cold, not gone. You gotta keep him close, under your coat. Body heat, ma'am, that's what'll save him." She pulled Eli close again, pressing him against her chest, tears spilling down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't notice." The man nodded slowly, his breath uneven. "You're just tired. Happens." The bus's headlights appeared down the street, a long-awaited glow cutting through the snow. Clara looked up, then back at the man. He was already backing away, like a shadow retreating to where he came from. "Wait," she called. "What's your name?" He hesitated. The wind carried his answer. "Marcus." The bus screeched to a stop. She climbed aboard, still holding Eli close. When she turned to look through the frosted window, Marcus was gone. Only his coat remained, wrapped around her child, still radiating the last bit of warmth from the hands of a man the world didn't see. Morning light crept through a clouded sky, turning the snow into a dull, dirty gray. The city woke up, horns, footsteps, coffee cups clinking, but no one noticed the man sleeping under the bridge. Marcus Hale stirred, shivering as cold seeped through the thin cardboard beneath him. He pulled his blanket, an old tarp, closer around his shoulders. Nearby, steam rose from a sewer grate, and the faint smell of diesel hung in the air. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face with trembling hands. The night before flashed in his mind, the woman, her baby, the cold. He could still feel the tiny heartbeat against his palms. It was the first warm thing he'd felt in weeks. Beside him, an elderly woman wrapped in scarves was already awake, feeding pigeons pieces of stale bread. Her name was Ruth, and she'd been living on the streets even longer than Marcus. "You didn't sleep much," she said softly, not looking up. He smiled weakly. "Didn't have much to sleep for." Ruth nodded, eyes kind but tired. "That woman from last night. You saved that baby, didn't you?" Marcus shrugged. "Just did what anyone would do." Ruth let out a quiet laugh. "Anyone? You've been out here long enough to know better. Most folks don't even look our way." He didn't answer. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small photo, crumpled, edges torn. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, missing a front tooth, smiling at something beyond the frame. Lena, his daughter. Ruth saw it and said nothing. She knew his story, or at least the parts he let slip when the nights got too long and the silence too heavy. Once Marcus Hale had worn a uniform, a firefighter's jacket, shiny and proud. He'd run into burning buildings for people he'd never met. But one night, the fire came for his own home. He'd gotten everyone out except Lena. The smoke had been too thick, the heat too strong, and when it was over, nothing was left but ash and guilt. He'd tried to keep living for a while, but the bottle became easier than the mirror. His wife left. The job went next. Then the apartment. Eventually, all that remained was the sound of sirens in his dreams. Now the city barely noticed him, another nameless man beneath a bridge. Later that day, Marcus wandered to the soup kitchen near Wabash Avenue. The line was long, mostly men in ragged coats, a few women with carts full of plastic bags. He waited quietly, staring at the steam rising from the kitchen window. When his turn came, a young volunteer smiled awkwardly. "Morning, sir. You want extra bread?" He nodded. "Please." The volunteer hesitated, then whispered, "You're the guy from last night, right? The one who helped that woman?" Marcus blinked. "What?" "Someone posted about it online, said a homeless man saved her baby at the bus stop near Oak Street. Folks are talking about it." Marcus's stomach twisted. They shouldn't be. The volunteer frowned. "Why not? It's a good thing you did." He didn't respond. Praise was harder to swallow than pity. That night Ruth found him again near the bridge, sitting by a small fire in a rusted barrel. "They're calling you a hero," she said with a crooked smile. "Imagine that, a hero sleeping in the dirt." Marcus stared into the flames. "Heroes don't end up here." Ruth poked at the fire with a stick. "Maybe the wrong ones do." He glanced at her. "You ever think about leaving this life, Ruth? Like getting clean, finding a place?" She chuckled. "At my age, the world's done with me. But you—" She pointed her stick at him. "You still got fight left. I saw it last night." Marcus said nothing, but her words stuck. When he finally lay down that night, the snow still falling around him, he thought of the woman's face, her trembling hands, the baby's faint cry. For the first time in years, he felt something that almost hurt. Hope. 2 days had passed since that freezing night at the bus stop, but Clara Miller couldn't stop thinking about the man who had appeared out of nowhere, the stranger who had saved her son. Every time she looked at Eli, sleeping peacefully in his crib, she saw those dark, weathered hands pressing life back into his tiny body. She had returned Marcus's coat the next morning, washed and folded. But he was gone. No trace of him. No one at the bus stop had seen him again. It was as if he'd melted into the city like snow on pavement. Clara sat at her kitchen table in a small, borrowed apartment, a friend's spare room that smelled faintly of damp carpet. Bills lay scattered across the table, overdue notices, rent statements, hospital forms. But her mind wasn't on any of it. She just wanted to find him. She wrapped Eli in a blanket and went out. The cold was sharp again, biting at her cheeks as she walked downtown. The first place she tried was the homeless shelter near Madison Street. A woman at the front desk, gray hoodie, clipboard, tired eyes, looked up as Clara approached. "I'm looking for someone," Clara said. A man, mid-40s, maybe older, tall, African-American, beard, kind eyes. "His name's Marcus." The woman shook her head gently. That describes half the folks who come through here, honey. You got a last name? Clara hesitated. No. He helped me the other night. He saved my baby. The woman's expression softened. That's rare. Most of 'em keep to themselves. She flipped through a few pages. We got a Marcus Hale who sometimes eats here. Used to be a firefighter, I think. But he hasn't checked in this week. Firefighter. The word hit Clara like a quiet thunderclap. She felt a strange mix of admiration and sorrow. A man like that shouldn't be living on the streets. Do you know where he might be? She asked. The woman shrugged. If he's not here, maybe by the bridge off Wabash. That's where a lot of them sleep. Meanwhile, Marcus was sitting exactly there, under that bridge, sharing half a sandwich with a teenager who couldn't have been more than 17. The kid's name was Tony, thin and pale, face hidden under a hoodie. He'd tried to steal a loaf of bread from the soup kitchen earlier, but Marcus had stopped him. You don't have to take what's free, kid, Marcus said, breaking the bread in half and handing it over. They don't judge you there. Tony scowled. You think they don't? They look at me like trash. Marcus smirked, chewing slowly. Then you prove 'em wrong. Eat, wash up, show up again tomorrow. Keep showing up. Eventually they stop looking and start listening. Tony stared at him for a while, as if seeing something unfamiliar. Respect. Then he nodded quietly. You talk like someone who used to be somebody. Marcus's eyes went to the river. The reflection of city lights trembled in the dark water. Used to be, he murmured. By late afternoon, Clara reached the bridge. The air there was thick with the smell of damp concrete and smoke from small fires. She stepped carefully between sleeping bags and shopping carts, clutching Eli tight against her chest. Her heart pounded with guilt. She felt like an intruder in another world. A voice came from behind her. You shouldn't be here, miss. She turned. An older man with tired eyes looked at her, his beard frozen with frost. It's not safe. I'm looking for someone, she said. Marcus Hale. The man thought for a moment, then pointed toward the far end of the bridge, down there, by the blue tarp. Clara thanked him and walked slowly through the shadows until she saw him, sitting near a barrel fire, arms folded, face illuminated by the flickering light. For a moment, she just stood there. He looked smaller now, more fragile than she remembered, but she knew it was him. Marcus, she said softly. He looked up, startled, his face lit with faint recognition. You again? He said, almost smiling. How's the little one? Warm, she replied. Thanks to you. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. Clara hesitated, unsure what else to say. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thermos. It's coffee, she said. Still hot. He took it with both hands, as if it were made of gold. Haven't had this in a while, he murmured, taking a sip. Steam curled around his face. You didn't have to come here. I did, she said quietly. You saved my son. I had to thank you. Properly. He looked away toward the water. Don't thank me, ma'am. Just take care of that boy. I will, she said, but I want to help you too. Marcus gave a small, tired laugh. People don't help men like me. They just pass by. Clara's voice was soft but firm. Then maybe it's time someone didn't. That night when she left, the city lights shimmered through the snow. Marcus sat by the fire long after she was gone, holding the thermos in his hands, as if it was proof that warmth still existed in the world. 3 days later, the snow turned to freezing rain. The city looked bruised under the gray sky, sidewalks slick with slush, the air heavy with that particular mix of cold and exhaust that only big cities have in winter. Clara Miller pushed Eli's stroller carefully down the sidewalk, one hand gripping an umbrella that kept turning inside out. She wasn't sure what she was doing. Part of her told her to forget that night, to focus on getting her life back together. But another part, the louder one, couldn't let it go. Ever since she met Marcus Hale, something inside her had shifted. Maybe it was guilt, maybe admiration. Or maybe it was the haunting thought that someone who had saved her child was still sleeping under a bridge. She'd been to the shelter again, but they hadn't seen him. She'd even asked around a few diners, but no one knew him by name, just another man with nowhere to go. Still, she kept walking downtown, hoping she might see him again. And somehow she did. It was late afternoon. Near the entrance of a subway station, Clara noticed a man struggling with heavy grocery bags. He dropped one, oranges rolling across the wet pavement, and there, helping him gather them up, was Marcus. He was wearing a cleaner coat now, probably donated, but his face was the same, strong, weary, kind. The way he crouched, picking up oranges for a stranger without being asked, it was exactly the man she remembered. "Marcus," she called. He looked up. For a second, confusion crossed his face, then recognition. His eyes softened. "Clara," he said slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "I didn't think I'd find you again," she admitted, smiling awkwardly. "But I guess the city's smaller than it feels." He chuckled, a quiet, low sound. "Not for most of us." The man with the groceries thanked him and left. Marcus stood there for a moment, uncertain, before Clara stepped closer. "I owe you something more than coffee this time," she said. "At least a meal that isn't from a shelter." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she replied. "That's why I want to." For a long moment he hesitated. Then, finally, he nodded. "All right. But I'm buying next time," she smiled. "Deal." They found a small diner tucked between two pawn shops. It smelled like burnt bacon and old coffee, but it was warm. The waitress didn't look twice when Marcus walked in. She'd seen everything. They sat across from each other in a booth by the window. Eli slept in his stroller beside them, one hand clutching his blanket. "So," Clara began, stirring her coffee, "how long have you been in Chicago?" "Born and raised," Marcus said. "South Side. Used to work at Station 42, fire department." Her eyes widened. "You were a firefighter?" He nodded, his gaze dropping to the table. "A long time ago." "What happened?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Fire took my little girl. Couldn't save her. Couldn't save myself after that either." Silence. The hum of the diner filled the space between them. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. He forced a small smile. "You didn't start the fire." "No," she said, her voice trembling, "but you saved mine." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. For a second the walls he'd built inside him seemed to crack. He cleared his throat. "You got family here?" "Not really," she said. "My mom's in Florida. We haven't talked in years. Eli's dad, he left when I got pregnant." "Guess both of us know something about losing people," he said quietly. They sat in silence after that, watching the rain streak the window. The city outside blurred into moving lights, cars, buses, strangers. When the check came, Clara slid it toward herself. Marcus started to protest, but she raised a hand. "Don't," she said softly. "You've done enough." As they stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air felt cleaner somehow, lighter. Marcus looked up at the gray sky, exhaled. "You know," he said, "I used to believe there wasn't any good left in this world. But then I met a lady who proved me wrong." Clara looked at him, puzzled. "Who's that?" He smiled faintly. "You'll meet her someday." They both laughed, awkward, warm, real. When she turned to leave, she looked back one last time. Marcus stood under the flickering streetlight, steam rising from the subway grate beside him. He looked less like a stranger and more like someone who'd once had a life, and maybe, just maybe, was beginning to find it again. That night, the city was alive with sirens. The sound Marcus could never escape. He lay awake under the bridge, staring at the black steel above him as the distant wail cut through the winter air. Each siren was a ghost, a memory that clawed its way back. The cold didn't bother him as much anymore. It was the silence afterward, the moment when everything stopped and all that remained was the echo of his own thoughts. He closed his eyes, and the darkness filled with fire, flames, smoke thick as tar, the smell of melting plastic. He could hear her voice. "Daddy!" Faint at first, then sharper, more desperate. He ran through the hall, dragging a hose that felt heavier with every step. "Lena, stay where you are, baby." But the door wouldn't open. It was warped from the heat. He kicked it once, twice, and then it gave way. The room was an inferno. Everything, the walls, the curtains, her toys, burning. He saw her, crouched by the bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit. He reached for her, but a beam collapsed, flames cutting between them. The ceiling cracked. Smoke filled his lungs. He heard her cough. Then, nothing. He'd gotten 3 other kids out of that building that night. The papers called him a hero. But when they found Lena, there was nothing left to save. Marcus sat up abruptly, breath shaking, sweat freezing on his forehead despite the cold. He pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. Across from him, Ruth stirred under her blanket. "You dreamin' again?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. "Every night," he finally muttered. She nodded slowly, then reached into her coat pocket and handed him a piece of bread. "Eat," she said. "Fire's out now, Marcus. You just keep standin' in the smoke." He gave a dry laugh. "Maybe that's where I belong." Ruth's voice softened. "Ain't nobody belongs in pain. We just visit it too long." He took the bread but didn't eat. He looked toward the city skyline, towers rising like dark monuments, their windows glowing faintly. Once he used to stand up there, not down here. The next afternoon he wandered aimlessly through downtown, past shop windows filled with Christmas displays, blinking lights, toy trains, smiling mannequins. One display stopped him, a little girl's doll, wearing a red dress, her hair tied with a blue ribbon. It was almost the same as the one he'd given Lena for her 5th birthday. He stood there too long, until a woman inside the shop tapped the glass and gestured for him to move along. He nodded apologetically and stepped away, his throat tightening. He found himself near the park, the one he used to visit with his daughter. The swings creaked in the wind, empty and wet from melting snow. He sat on a bench, staring at them, until a familiar voice interrupted. "Marcus?" He turned. Clara stood there, bundled in a heavy coat, Eli pressed close to her chest. He blinked, almost in disbelief. "You find me everywhere, don't you?" "I wasn't looking for you this time," she said. "Just walking. Guess the world's smaller than we think." She sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. The city hummed quietly around them. Finally, she said, "You looked like you were somewhere else." "I was," he murmured. "A long time ago." She waited. He sighed, his voice low. "I had a daughter once, Lena. She was 6. I was supposed to keep her safe." He paused, his eyes fixed on the ground. "But the fire took her before I could." Clara's breath caught, but she said nothing. "I thought being a firefighter meant I could save everyone," Marcus continued. "Turns out I couldn't even save my own." The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. Clara didn't try to comfort him. She just sat there, listening, letting his words exist without trying to fix them. When he finally looked up, she met his gaze. Her voice was soft but firm. "You saved my son, Marcus. Maybe it's time you saved yourself too." He let out a shaky laugh. "Easier said than done." "I know," she said, "but sometimes the hardest part of saving someone is believing they deserve to be saved." Marcus looked at her, eyes glistening in the cold light. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, for the first time in years, he whispered something that sounded like a prayer, not to God, but to the possibility of forgiveness. After that day in the park, Clara couldn't stop thinking about him. Marcus, the man who had saved her son from freezing to death, the man who carried grief like it was stitched into his skin. Every time she passed that bus stop, she saw it differently now. It wasn't just the place where she almost lost everything. It was where 2 broken lives had crossed paths by accident, or maybe by something bigger. She started bringing an extra sandwich in her bag when she went out. Sometimes she'd find him, sometimes not. When she did, she'd hand it to him without a word, and he'd nod in quiet gratitude. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them began to feel less like emptiness and more like understanding. One morning, the snow had turned to sleet, soaking the streets in gray slush. Clara spotted Marcus under an overpass, huddled near a trash can fire with a few other homeless men. She hesitated, then walked toward them, holding a thermos of soup. "Brought something warm," she said, setting it down. Marcus looked up, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said simply. He poured himself a little into a dented tin cup. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe for you." She smiled faintly. "Neither is standing at a bus stop with a baby in a snowstorm. Guess we both make bad choices." He almost smiled. Almost. "You got a smart mouth for a quiet woman," she shrugged. "Comes with being tired of the world." He nodded like he understood that perfectly. They sat for a while as the others drifted off to find shelter. The fire crackled between them, orange light flickering on the wet concrete walls. "Eli's okay?" Marcus asked quietly. "Yeah," she said. "He's fine. Doesn't remember anything. Just knows a man saved him." Marcus looked down, voice barely audible. "That's good. Don't tell him my name. Let him remember it as something good, not someone like me." Clara frowned. "Someone like you?" He gave a hollow laugh. "A man who lost his daughter because he thought he could save everyone." She wanted to argue, to tell him that wasn't his fault, but something in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't guilt she saw there, it was belief, the kind that had lived too long to be reasoned with. Instead, she said quietly, "Maybe saving Eli was her way of thanking you for still being here." He didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. The fire popped softly. After a moment, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a child's mitten. "You dropped this the day you carried him to the ambulance," she said. "I kept it." He took it from her, staring at it in silence. The fabric was small, faded pink, with a little snowflake stitched on the cuff. "That's not his," he said finally. "I know," Clara whispered. "It's Lena's, isn't it?" He froze. For a moment the whole world seemed to stop. He looked at her, really looked, and there it was again, that unbearable mix of pain and gratitude. "How did you—" "You said her name in your sleep, that night, at the shelter." He swallowed hard. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything about that night," she said. "The cold, the fear, and then you." Marcus turned away, gripping the mitten like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. His voice cracked when he spoke again. "I think I was trying to save her again. When I saw your boy, I didn't see him, I saw her." Clara's eyes softened. "Then maybe you did save her this time." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, only the rain, only the fire. Two broken people sitting in a forgotten corner of the city, and yet, in that small circle of warmth, something fragile was beginning to form, not love, not yet, but maybe the start of forgiveness. That night, when Marcus lay down on his cardboard bed, he held the mitten close to his chest and whispered, "Good night, Lena. I did it right this time." And for the first time in years, the sirens in his dreams were quiet. Winter had a way of testing him. The days were short, the nights endless, and the cold seemed to seep not just into bones, but into memory, into every wound he carried. Marcus Hale had been walking the streets longer than he could remember, and some nights the weight of loss, shame, and survival became unbearable. That night was one of them. He found himself near the corner of State and Lake, the street slick with ice and grime. In his hands, a bottle he had promised himself he'd leave behind. He shook it, stared at it, and before he realized, it was already pressed to his lips. The warmth hit like fire, and for a moment the world blurred, the bridge, the fire, the faces of children, Clara's voice, all spinning together into a dizzying fog. He fell into an alley, curled against the wall, and let the bottle numb him. He could hear the city moving around him, honking cars, distant laughter, the screech of a train on the elevated tracks. But inside, the past was louder than anything. Lena's tiny hands burning against his, smoke choking him. The day Eli's lips turned blue in the snow, his helpless panic. Every mistake, every loss, replaying like a broken record. And in the darkest corner of his mind, a whisper echoed, sharper than the wind. You saved the wrong child. He buried his face in his hands, silent tears freezing on his cheeks. For the first time, even Marcus Hale, the man who had survived everything, felt like he might break completely. Morning came gray and biting. Marcus woke with a splitting headache, the bottle still clutched loosely in his hand. He looked at his reflection in a puddle. A stranger stared back. Red eyes, pallid skin, hollow cheeks. He barely remembered the night before, but he knew one thing: he couldn't stay here, not like this. From the alley came a familiar voice. Marcus! Ruth had found him. Her hands were shaking from the cold, her eyes scanning his face. What have you done? She asked, kneeling beside him. I needed it, he whispered hoarsely. Needed what? To throw away everything you fought for? He closed his eyes. I can't forgive myself. I never will. Ruth placed a calloused hand on his shoulder. Then do something worth forgiving. He looked at her, confused. What do you mean? You saved that baby, Marcus. You can still save yourself. But you have to want it. That's all. Her words struck him like a hammer. He swallowed hard, forcing the bile of guilt and regret down his throat. For hours he sat in silence, letting the wind cut across his face, letting Ruth's words settle inside. By the evening he stood. His joints ached, his body trembled, but his eyes were sharper. He wiped the bottle off the concrete and crushed it underfoot. He had to find her, Clara. He had to see Eli again, not to claim gratitude, but to make sure he was still alive in the world he had been ready to leave. The night was long and empty, but for the first time in months, Marcus Hale walked with purpose. The fire inside him, the same one that had once destroyed his life, now burned differently. A quiet, resolute determination. He wouldn't run from it this time. The night air smelled of wet concrete and distant exhaust as Marcus walked the streets, tracing the familiar paths between bridges and alleys. He hadn't slept in hours, but his resolve kept him moving. He had to find Clara, had to see Eli, had to remind himself he was still part of the world. Then a shrill alarm cut through the silence. Sirens. Too many. Too close. He turned toward the shelter he had passed countless times before. Smoke curled into the sky, black against the gray winter night. Flames licked the edges of the roof, and panic-filled shouts echoed from inside. Without thinking, Marcus sprinted forward. The fire was fierce, the heat searing his face even from the sidewalk. People were running from the building, coughing, their eyes wide with fear. He didn't stop. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and ash. He couldn't see far, only shadows and glowing embers. His lungs burned as he inhaled, but he kept moving. A woman was trapped near a collapsed beam. Ruth. Her hand was pinned under rubble, her face streaked with soot. She cried out as Marcus ran toward her. "I've got you!" he shouted, sliding under the fallen wood. Sweat and tears mixed with soot as he lifted it with every ounce of strength he had. Ruth scrambled free, coughing, shivering. "Go, go!" she gasped. "I'm coming!" another voice cried from deeper inside. Marcus didn't hesitate. He heard a child crying. Not Eli, but another boy, no older than 7. The flames roared around him. Heat pressed in from all sides. Adrenaline overtook fear. He found the boy, shoving debris aside, wrapping him in his coat. His heart pounded, his vision blurred, but he carried the child toward the exit. The fire seemed to chase him with every step. Behind him, a shelf collapsed, scattering sparks. He stumbled, twisting his ankle, but refused to drop the boy. Every breath burned, every movement a fight against instinct to flee. Finally, they reached the doorway. Outside, The cold air hit them like a wave, stealing the taste of smoke from their lungs. Firefighters rushed past, taking over. Marcus collapsed on the snow, chest heaving. The boy clung to him, shivering. Ruth knelt beside him, eyes wide, her hand on his arm. You saved us," she whispered. He barely nodded, his body trembling uncontrollably. Flames reflected in his wet eyes, the barrel fire of his own guilt finally spilling out. Later, medics wrapped him in blankets, checking burns on his arms and face. He barely felt it, the rush of adrenaline still coursing, the echo of sirens ringing in his head. One of the firefighters knelt beside him, awe in his eyes. You're the guy from the news, right? The homeless man who saved a baby?" Marcus gave a small, tired laugh. "Something like that." A paramedic put a hand on his shoulder. "You're lucky to be alive, sir. Burns are serious." He looked up at the city lights shimmering through the smoke. The streets seemed different now, alive in a way he hadn't seen in years. For the first time in a long while, Marcus Hale felt a strange, trembling sense of purpose. Even broken, even burned, even guilty, he could still do something right. Marcus Hale woke in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic cutting through the cold residue of the streets. His arms were wrapped in bandages, some of the burns from the shelter fire still raw. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, and for the first time in weeks, he could hear life beyond sirens and smoke. The hum of hospital machinery, quiet conversations, the distant laughter of visitors. He shifted, testing his body. Pain radiated from his ankle, his chest, his hands. But beneath it all was something new. Clarity, the fire, the bottle, the grief. It hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled him. The door opened. Clara stepped inside, Eli in her arms, eyes wide at the sight of him. "Marcus," she said softly, a tremor in her voice. "How are you feeling?" He tried to smile, but it was weak. "Alive," he admitted. She set Eli down beside him in a chair. The baby giggled, reaching tiny hands toward Marcus. He hesitated for a moment, then, slowly, carefully, lifted him. Warmth spread through him, and for a moment the long years of loss, cold, and guilt faded. "Hi, Eli," he whispered. The baby cooed, unafraid, as if instinctively recognizing the man who had saved his life. Clara watched, tears brimming. "He remembers you," she said. "I think he always will." Days passed. Marcus's injuries healed, though the mental scars ran deeper. Clara visited often, bringing meals, news of the city, and sometimes nothing at all, just presence. Their bond, fragile at first, grew steadily. Marcus began to speak of the past, not just the fire, not just Lena, but everything. He admitted to nights of drinking, nights of wandering, the deep guilt that had kept him on the streets. Clara listened without judgment. She didn't try to fix him, she simply bore witness, which was enough. One afternoon, as winter gave way to the first hints of spring, Marcus left the hospital with Clara and Eli beside him. The streets still smelled of exhaust and wet concrete, but they smelled like possibility too. He carried only a small backpack, the essentials, and the clothes the hospital had given him. They walked past the bridge where he had once slept, past the bus stop where Eli had nearly frozen, past the shelter that had almost claimed him again. Each landmark was a memory, a scar, and a reminder that he had survived, not because the world had spared him, but because he had chosen, again and again, to keep walking. Clara looked at him. "What will you do now?" she asked. He paused, letting the city hum around them. The sun glinted off puddles, and he could hear children laughing somewhere nearby. He felt the pull of the street still, the draw of the life he had known. But he also felt something else, the quiet, steady courage of someone who had faced death, loss, and despair, and decided he wanted more. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know I don't want to live like that anymore. Not for me, not for her, not for Eli." Clara smiled faintly. "Then maybe we can figure it out together." Marcus looked down at the baby in his arms. Eli's fingers curled around his thumb, a tiny anchor to the world. He felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years, a chance to live, to atone, to rebuild. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope. Weeks turned into months. Marcus checked into a local program for housing and counseling. He began volunteering at the shelter, helping children and families who reminded him of the lives he had lost and the lives he could still save. The streets didn't hold him anymore. He had found a place in the world, however fragile it was. Clara and Marcus formed an unlikely partnership, a bond forged not by romance, but by survival, compassion, and the shared knowledge of what it meant to face despair and still rise. Eli became the living symbol of their perseverance, the reason Marcus learned to smile again, the reason he finally forgave himself. And every so often, when the wind carried the faint scent of winter snow, Marcus remembered the night that had started it all, a freezing bus stop, a helpless baby, and a choice to act. A choice that had given him not only a second chance, but a reason to live. In a city that often ignored the broken and the lost, Marcus Hale had become proof that even the most shattered souls could still find light.